It all started when I moved into my new apartment. It was an old building, but I loved it. The charm of the creaky wooden floors and the high ceilings gave it character. Plus, the rent was affordable. My new place was perfect, or so I thought. The first time I saw my neighbor, Mr. Thompson, he gave me the creeps. He was a tall, thin man with pale skin and dark, sunken eyes. He always wore the same old, dirty trench coat, no matter the weather. He rarely spoke, and when he did, his voice was a raspy whisper that sent shivers down my spine. At first, I tried to ignore him. Everyone has their quirks, right? But soon, strange things began to happen. It started with noises in the middle of the night. I would hear faint tapping sounds coming from the walls. At first, I thought it was just the building settling, but then the tapping would turn into scratching, like someone was trying to claw their way through the walls. One night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. It was so faint that I could barely make out the words, but it seemed to be coming from Mr. Thompson's apartment. My curiosity got the better of me, and I pressed my ear against the wall. The whispers were clearer now, but I couldn't understand what he was saying. It sounded like some sort of chant. I tried to go back to sleep, convincing myself that it was just my imagination. But then, things escalated. One evening, as I was coming home from work, I found a note slipped under my door. It was written in a shaky hand and simply said, "Stay away from him." Chills ran down my spine. Who could have left this note, and why? I decided to confront Mr. Thompson. Maybe it was all a misunderstanding. But when I knocked on his door, there was no answer. I knocked harder, but still nothing. Just as I was about to give up, the door creaked open. The apartment was dark, and a foul smell wafted out. I called out his name, but there was no response. I decided to step inside. The apartment was a mess. Piles of old newspapers and magazines were stacked everywhere. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. I noticed strange symbols drawn on the walls, and in the center of the living room there was a large black candle that had burned down to a stub. Suddenly I heard a noise behind me. I spun around to see Mr. Thompson standing in the doorway, his eyes wild and his trench coat hanging off his thin frame. He lunged at me, but I managed to dodge and run out of the apartment. My heart was pounding as I slammed the door behind me and ran to my apartment, locking the door. I called the police, but when they arrived, Mr. Thompson was gone. They searched his apartment and found nothing but the same mess I had seen. They told me he was probably just a crazy old man and advised me to stay away from him. For the next few days, I was on edge. I kept my doors and windows locked and avoided going out at night. But then, one night, I heard the scratching again. This time it was louder and more frantic. I grabbed a flashlight and decided to investigate. As I walked down the hallway, the scratching grew louder. It was coming from the basement. I hesitated, but something compelled me to keep going. I opened the door to the basement and slowly descended the stairs. The air was cold and damp, and the smell of mold was overwhelming. I shone my flashlight around, but at first, I saw nothing. Then, in the corner, I saw a figure hunched over, scratching at the floor. It was Mr. Thompson. His trench coat was torn, and his hands were bloody from the scratching. He was mumbling to himself, the same chant I had heard before. When he saw me, he let out a guttural scream and lunged at me again. This time, I was ready. I swung the flashlight and hit him on the head, knocking him out. I ran back upstairs and called the police again. When they arrived, they took Mr. Thompson away. They told me he had a history of mental illness and had been off his medication for some time. They assured me he would be taken care of and I would be safe. But even now, I can't shake the feeling that something isn't right. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the scratching. And when I look out my window, I swear I see a figure in a trench coat watching me from the shadows.